Hello, and welcome to the Specialty Matcha Podcast. My name is Ryan. This is my co-host Sungjun, who also goes by Sam,
Hello, hello.
and we're the co-founders of Senko Matcha Products.
We launched this podcast to discuss our learning journey in matcha, share startup stories, and interview experts. And right now, we are sitting right next to this 100-year-old camphor tree, looking directly into this beautiful riverbank of Uchikawa. And as we just finished our first Teizumi in underneath a Honzu shaded tea garden, there was something magical about this moment.
We wanted to record our initial raw impressions, so we're actually doing this from my phone. So if the audio is not perfect, apologies in advance. But we had the wonderful experience. We're very grateful to have gotten to do handpicking, Tizumi, of Asahi Cultivar trees that have been Honzu shaded here in Uji. We're not allowed to disclose who it was, so we're not going to give any revealing identifiable detail, but we wanted to document and describe the experience of like, what is it like? What is Tizumi like? So, Zongjun, what were some of your first impressions if someone asks you like, hey, what's it like to handpick tea for tencha to be turned into matcha?
I think the first thing that I notice is the smell underneath Honzu. This really fragrant floral smell coming out from the tea trees. It was something wonderful. And the temperature difference as we enter underneath Honzu. It was a pretty sunny and hot day today in Uji, but it was actually very cool and almost a little bit cold underneath Honzu.
Yeah. And we had the experience today of being underneath kalesha, or sort of the black, quote unquote, synthetic shading cloths, but still on a raised tana, so you could walk underneath them. And as you know, we were walking around Uji afterwards, if you really look closely, you can see the heat radiating up from these black tana, from these black
Cost.
cloths, these black coverings. So the temperature difference was enormous between the Honzu and Kalesha. It was much more comfortable. And actually, when you're hand picking, you got to get pretty close to the ground. So sometimes you basically have to completely squat to have access to some of the branches. And close to the earth, I would say it was almost like chilly. I had a couple moments where there was a little breeze pass through. It felt like I was walking into like a cellar. Like when you walk into a really old house that goes deep underground or into a cave. Very similar humid kind of, 50 degrees Fahrenheit type breeze and feeling, which was really interesting. And the last thing I would expect, because it's actually quite a hot day here.
Yeah, totally agree. And so picking the tea itself is very different than, of course, picking Chinese tea and also very different from picking sencha. So I almost need to unlearn my previous experience picking other teas to pick, this Hongzu shaded Asahi, which is going to be made for tencha. So the trick is to feel the tenderness of all of the new grown branches and you snap the entire branch. You don't pick like individual buds, or you don't pick individual leaves, or you don't pick the one bud and two leaf or one leaf kind of composition. You snap the entire branch off, and part of the stem is going to later be turned into hojita. And the leaves itself is going to be turned into tencha themselves. So that was very interesting, and we also learned that it's not the toppest leaves that are the best. It's actually the leaves that are underneath the bushes. They kind of get covered further by the leaves on the bush so that they receive even less sunlight. That tastes the best, the most umami. And some of them, I guess, receive so little sunlight that they might have a little discolored. They actually look pale and white.
Yeah, some of them were very white, very pale, almost yellow, and these young tender buds that were underneath. And it's interesting. So before the harvest, probably about a month ago now, and whenever you're doing tencha production, you remove the apex bud or the bud that's on the very very top. And what happens is when the apex bud releases a hormone that goes all the way down that particular branch and sub branches that is suppressing the growth of what we call secondary meristem. Just like we have stem cells in our bodies that are undifferentiated tissue, it can basically replace any or most of the different type of cells in your body. And the biologist thought it would be confusing to call these stem cells in plants. At least that's what my biology teacher has told me. So they call them meristem cells, and they're undifferentiated tissue. So basically, it can turn into any part of a plant, and they're basically the lack of that hormone that's suppressing its growth as a signal to grow. So you have all these mature leaves and a little bit bud, little baby bud that's being hugged right in between the junction between the mature leaf and the stem, and it starts to grow. So what you actually do when you're harvesting, you pull the branch towards you and you start at the base. And many leaves down, nestled down there are these buds. And sometimes they grow into tender young leaves. And that is what you pick. And sometimes they have the chance to grow themselves into having many leaves now, or sometimes it's just a much smaller leaf. That's what Zongjin was talking about when you remove the entire branch. It's just this new tender part, which sometimes can grow quite large. So, from when you pull one single branch of the plant towards you, you might be able to pick your actual plucking motion might be anywhere from 10 to 15 plucks, working your way all the way up. And it's even more difficult when the main branch that you pull has sub branches, because then it's like trying to, if you think like a big Christmas tree, you have all these branches and sub branches and trying to remove very specific parts of each. You kind of have to work in an organized way. So that was kind of a hamper to efficiency. But no, it was really cool.
And as you're doing so, your body needs to lean all the way over towards the tea bushes. It's a killer to my back and my waist. My lower body feels numb after standing there for 3 hours. It was quite painful. And if you look around, it was all of these 60, 70-year-old grannies and grandpas picking tea around you. And they were a lot faster than me. So that was almost a little discouraging.
Yeah, I think the oldest person there picking tea was like 85 years old.
Yeah.
So, and we were only there for 3 hours for about 25% of today's. Actually, it's quite daunting. You look across these entire fields that are all going to be Tazumi, and you think to yourself, oh my word, wow, just the amount of work that goes into hand picking tea. My back hurts too. And we were only doing it for 3 hours, and it's, uh, it's uncomfortable work. I'm sure there's worse work. We've been knowledge workers our whole careers, so like doing this type of manual work is very new to us. But I am so much more grateful for all of the tea pickers, and I have actually changed my position on Honzu shaded or non-Honzu shaded Tazumi matcha. I am no longer ever going to mix anything with Kazumi tea or let anyone else around me. No lattes, no mixed drinks. I don't care if like it's like Noma or 11 Madison Park or like La Bernardin chef making something. Like the amount of backbreaking work of actual human pain that it takes to harvest this type of tea is, I think
It's painful. It's painful. And it's just the harvesting part, like Honzu and all of these shading works goes for days and months. And these, structures are hard to fix. For anyone to be able to create a Honzu structure, someone needs to actually physically stand on top of the tana and be able to sense where the skeleton of the tana is, so that they can step their foot on top of it to spread the rice straws. So it's actually very dangerous work. We've learned tea farmers in Uji who had their relatives doing so and end up breaking their ribs because they fell down from the tana. So there are a lot of very challenging difficulties and efforts went into all of these productions of Hongzu shaded matcha.
Yeah, and some real human sacrifices. It's pretty interesting. There's a pretty strong case, actually, especially as farmers age, that Honzu is arguably the sustainability of this method, just from a danger and workplace hazard perspective, is quite high. And we were doing some independent exploration of our own a couple days ago here in Uji, walking around the Shirakawa region. And our goal was to get a real impression of the number of Hanzu shaded plants there. And I'm pretty sure we saw like 70 or 80% of what's in Shirakawa. At least that's what we could tell from the satellite pictures. And we were literally just walking on the highway for hours, like half the day, and looking at all of the structures and all the action going on. And I think we saw three, maybe
Maybe
four
for Hanzo.
Shirakawa. And typically it was a substructure, and then the rest was Kaleisha or the black synthetic cheesecloth that's a lot easier to work with. So the more context that we have, the more we realize that it's not really the end all be all. And it is like really the pinnacle of human effort. But, at what expense? And we've also heard too anecdotally that the taste difference isn't huge. So from a workplace hazard, like, are we putting people's health on the line by creating such demand for this when it doesn't make the world's largest impact in the tea, even though it's a heritage method?
Yeah, but Ryan, what is our position to make such comment? Like
That's true.
we've been talking to all these farmers. They were talking about all of these labor's works, but also by the end of the day, they were like, "This is traditional. This is how tencha was made for hundreds of years," and they are spending their effort trying to preserve this really dying art. And really mad respect to all these people from different area in Wuji. And we've heard that there are other places in Japan starting doing Honzu too. There are Honzu starting to be constructed in places like Yame. And I think this is a great news for this, traditional art. There's something really magical and beautiful standing underneath that straw canopy, looking through all of the sunlights, kind of creating this little dimmed light spots scattering through the entire tea field.
Yeah, the actual like color and like temperature of the light, so to speak, feels very different under the Honzu than it does under the Kalesha.
Yeah.
So like the actual spectral like light that is making it to the plants is different. You
Yeah.
can feel it. You can see it.
And the temperature is really obvious because, like, a lot of these Kanlen shots we saw are at least 3 layers. They're actually pretty thick, and between the layers, you have space for air to kind of flow through and kind of carry away a lot of the heat being retained by the color of the Kanlen shot. It's black, tains a lot of heat. But for Honzu, it's really just one layer above us, and it's so much obviously more cool than Kanlen shot. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Although I just really hope that the matcha boom doesn't put undue pressure to incentivize producers to do it when they just don't have the human capital, like the actual skilled people on site to not only create but maintain these structures, especially over the course of the season. Kind of really that story of how dangerous it is really was something I never even considered. So there's multiple sides to these things.
Well, it creates wonderful tasting matcha.
That's true.
And I will be much, much more grateful in the future consuming Tetsumi Honzu shaded Asahi or any other cultivars. We saw some other cultivars being planted underneath Honzu too. And it really brings people new appreciation to this wonderful drink.
The rate of picking is also something that I really appreciate. I think Sam and I together, with just a little tiny bit of help in the demoing early on about how to do it, we did because these plants are in big rows. You're only doing half of one bush at a time, and then you move, and then the other half would eventually be picked by someone else who's on the other side of the row. Kind of makes sense. And I think we moved down about 8 plants in 3 hours. So about 4 tea bushes with a little bit of help. And we collected about,
Underneath 2 kilos each.
yeah, just underneath 2 kilos each. So between 3 to 4 kilos. And that's of leaf that has like these fresh stems in it. And of course, it's fresh leaf, so there's a lot of water content. I forget what the percentage is, but it's got to be at least you take like 20% of that weight is what ends up making it as matcha.
Oh yeah, like the shrinkage rate is about 5 times for a lot of these teas in general, and you got to take away all of these stems and things. So it's another 20% of decrease from that weight. So very little, very little tea.
actually remarkably unclear if we have picked more Honzu shaded matcha now than we have consumed. Tizumi, Honzu shaded matcha than we have consumed. I hope that we have ever in our lives to have contributed back the amount of effort that this singular processing step has. Kind of wild.
It is wild. Something also very interesting that I learned is that so I was actually quite curious about how the winds are not going to blow all of these straw away doing Hongzu shading because in some other parts of Uji or further out into Wazuka or Uji Tawala, people are constantly talking about this wind damage of kanesha hitting on the tea bush, creating some bruise on the tea leaves. And all of these winds in higher elevation mountains kind of sometimes destroy the shading and needs to be constantly fixed. So, I asked the question to our farmer today, and they said that there's very little wind actually underneath that area that will do any damage or blow any of the straw away. So I guess there's also a physical or geographical limitation of where can Hongzu be done. Because if it's in some of the more mountainous area, there's just really no way for you to be able to hold all of the rice straw together as canopy.
That's interesting. I actually never thought about that until you just said that, that there's a lot of local constraints around production methods. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so it's really a limited technique, not only being limited by human or labors, but also by geography.
Hmm.
Mm.
That makes sense. It really makes sense. Something that I was very surprised by was the vibe. We were the only foreigners there, and I would have expected that when you're coordinating with this many tea pickers, because there were a lot of people there, and it's the busiest time of year for tea farmers in general, who are putting in these crazy hours and constantly working, and I'm sure getting very little sleep, sacrificing for all of us so that we can consume and sell matcha, is that it was so calm. It was the atmosphere was also so positive. Everyone was laughing and joking, and there was some chit chat. I couldn't understand it because I can't understand Japanese, but everyone's interaction was so positive, and everyone was just so grateful and gracious to everyone there. In my mind, it was like a little bit more chaotic, but it really wasn't. It just felt really genuine in a way that I guess I didn't think would happen under such circumstances. As someone like myself, I tend to get a little frazzled when you have to do a lot of coordination with a lot of different people, and there's all this time pressure, and there's all these complexities, and you have all these people who have various levels of experience working on this thing that you've spent all year getting to this point because most almost all of the farmers here, the good farmers only harvest once per year, and like all of your eggs are in this one basket in a few nice days because they don't pick when it rains. Like there's all this.
It was more like a community gathering for them to do some work and chit chat.
I'm sure it is actual work.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
but it didn't feel like that.
yeah, it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, they certainly do not get that project manager anxiety that you do. But yeah, it's super friendly. Everyone obviously feels like know each other for a long time. And I was asking one of the farmers that how is the interaction between different gardens and farmers within Wuji? And this farmers told me that it's actually a super friendly and small community. Everyone helps each other out during harvest and processing. So like it's you really get this kind of vibe, like almost like a Miyazaki movie from all these mountain villages or small villages. People are friendly, people are nice, and people are just right there, living a nice life. Makes me almost want to retire here.
But actually, like a Miyazaki movie is such a fantastic way of putting it. It almost felt like a fiction. So much so that we didn't notice or feel any of the pressure. And like even the farmer who invited us was like asking us, if we have any questions, feel free to ask. And they were spontaneously explaining things as we were going for like, I don't know, a good like half hour. I felt so guilty
Yeah.
because like there's so much going on in. It's like, it's okay. Just you can leave us. I'm sure you're so busy,
Yeah.
but they were so nice.
Yeah. And, this is really the busiest time of the year, and we do not have a proper translator to do the communication. So we had to rely on my very limited Japanese. And the farmers were like very actively using, Google Translate to help facilitate the communication. So we were, very grateful about that. And as we really convey the message that we really want to learn about tea farming, about Tetsumi, about Honzu shading, they were being super transparent about all the information and the questions that we ask.
Yeah, when you're really this close to the product and to the farm, the amount of gatekeeping really just seems to vanish. And matcha is such a unique product. It's so weird in so many ways because it's honestly like from a really high level perspective sometimes being a student of matcha trying to learn as much as we can about this product, its history, its legacy, and its nuances is that it feels gatekept a lot of times at every single level, including the preparation through all these ceremonial institutions and what all the cultural associations people put behind it. And like the tea schools are one of the more compelling or interesting things about the tea schools that I think they use as motivation for the students and acts as a mystery is that there are a lot of secret teachings. So if you are an Urasenke, a Motosenke, and I'm sure the other schools have some of this, although I know some are more transparent than others, there's a lot of this concept of secret teachings. It's kind of like you're almost joining a secret society or a living legacy, but you can only see more and more of it until you get into higher and higher levels and progress. So it often feels very gatekept. And we're also really interested right now in learning about the wholesalers and the chashi, the tea blenders, the tea purveyors. Also feels very, very gatekept. We were doing some retail learning of how products are being positioned in Uji, and also trying to see the matcha shortage firsthand, which is totally real. You can see out of stock and quantity limits here in Uji. We're here in May for matcha cans, and so only you can only buy one at a time. And we were at one store, and they only had two products left. And I asked, they were the same price, but they had different names. And I asked, what's the difference? And we kept hearing over and over, they're the same product, same product. And I'm like, well, how can they be the same product? They have different names. And then Zongjun helped facilitate the communication a bit. And we learned that one was for a motosenke, one was for urasenke, and it's the same blend, but two different poetic
Two
names.
different names. So this really adds another layer of the complexity of the naming scheme in Uji or in matcha. One product can literally be the same, but having different names because of their usage or their end customers.
So to take this full circle, I mean, it really feels very gate kept, and there's all of this complexity to learn when you're learning it. But whenever we're interacting with tea farmers, it just seems to vanish. If you can like have the opportunity to meet tea farmers and talk to them and be in the field. I've never had that feeling at all. It's like all of the stuffiness and associations and secrecy and complexity is just brought all the way back down to earth on the ground, like in the soil. Like it's just the raw thing, and people are much less hesitant to share information.
Yeah, and they are like much less enclosed to the outside, and also much less enclosed to each other too. All of these tea farmers, we have heard that, and we have seen them gathering in all these processing facility, helping each other out to create better tencha or better, other types of tea. So there is a really, strong sense of community that exists here in Japan in the tea world. So that's quite the opposite, yeah, I guess, to some other, communities that we saw.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Songjun, if anyone's listening, and I'm sure everyone who's a regular listener is definitely interested in doing this type of thing in the future, like what general advice could we offer people who want to have experience doing handpicked tea, either in Uji or in other places? And, what are the mechanics that they could do? to go about getting opportunities like this? Like, if we were to deconstruct, how did we end up there today? What lessons can we share with others that might be valuable?
Yeah, so definitely. First of all, try to build relationship before tea harvest season. There's really very little chance for you to be able to get a hold of a tea farmer in Wuji that you do not know before, to have them respond to you and have them help you to schedule, some time to sit down and learn, learn your story, learn your personality, learn, what do you want to do here, and then lead you to the tea garden to pick tea. They are like spinning around like tornadoes, trying to get things done, in midst of all these, chaotic situation. Gotta arrange different tea pickers doing different, cultivars. Gotta do all the schedule of the tea processing right after the fresh leaves being collected. They are busy. So definitely try to make your visit to these tea farmers, during off seasons for the first time, get to know them before asking to participate in tea picking. But that's of course for Uji, and for other regions. If you just want to, be able to stand in the tea garden, experiencing, plugging tea leaves off from tea bushes, there are other regions outside of Uji that are much more loose. So places like, Wazuka, places like Ujitewala, there's a lot of these farms that actually have connections with local schools, and they ship, buses and buses of students to all of these tea fields to participate in, tea picking. So in those areas, you definitely will have a better chance, participating and, getting to learn the firsthand experience, without, having too much planning in advance.
And a lot of the producers that are in Uji proper, are so inundated with requests to meet and with business inquiries that it's not uncommon to hear stories of them just not having time to respond. Will take a long time and a lot of persistence, probably, to get that first meeting, and would be much easier in general with some form of introduction, typically. So if you wanted to form direct relationships with them, the time to do that was probably a few years ago, before they were so inundated, and specialty matcha was less of a thing, right? It was much more novel, and the idea of going and not selling your tea just to the wholesalers, but to someone that was going to sell it on as a single origin, single cultivar products, relatively new. But everyone's rushing in. It's a big a gold mine land rush. And actually, we eventually want to source some tencha for our mills, but we're doing this purely academically. Everyone that we're talking to, we're just really there to learn and then to share the content, either anonymously or unanonymously here on this podcast, to share it with everyone else. So also, intention really matters, and also getting some background knowledge. Walking in, knowing what cultivars are, and a lot of the basics around matcha's production and history, etc., goes a really long way. Like, no farmer wants to be that first entry point. So, like, one of the general good pieces of advice for all startups and all businesses to be interesting. And a lot of these people who are contacting them are starting up a matcha business, and you can just pick a random location in the world and their matcha brand. And I could see myself, if I was a tea farmer, just not being that interested. Like, everyone says they're interested in preserving tradition, innovating on the product, and showcasing it to consumers, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sure after you see this enough times, you're like, okay, well, I already sell all of my product. I'm already dealing with a lot of these B2B accounts, and I don't have the capacity for any more. And I'm getting like 3 emails a week. Like, I'm probably just going to stop responding. And that's approximately where we are with all of these rock star famous farmers in Uji proper. And so I think there's a lot for proper tea sourcing, where you're forming direct relationships. The real land of opportunity is going to the places that are not as famous and the people that you do not see online. And we ourselves are not there yet, but we have heard a lot about other regions that are much more obscure and off the beaten path, both in Kyoto Prefecture and in other prefectures. And the difficult part is knowing who to contact. That is a game that we are still actively trying to figure out as well. And it's ironic of me to say this because we're sitting here in Uji having met, worked as a rock star Uji farmer because they're all rock star farmers. But it seems like that's where all the opportunity is, where these people are just not getting absolutely inundated to the point where they just cannot respond to everybody.
Yeah, Uji is definitely a recipe. It's ultra competitive in terms of, getting yourself in front of the line and to be able to just speak to anyone. But for, all the other more obscured tea farmers or tea areas out there, it's challenging. It's difficult. Frequently, these people will only just have a telephone number set somewhere on a newspaper or on some very obscure website. And that's the only way that you can contact them. And you need to have a car. You need to be able to navigate, through all of these regions to get to them. And you need to speak the language because, they really would not be able to, communicate to you that easily. A lot of them probably don't even know very much about how to use a cell phone properly. So using Google Translate might be a little bit challenging to facilitate a conversation with them.
Maybe for some of the older farmers. Yeah. So if we were to summarize, it's very difficult right now to meet the people in Uji proper. If you can, that's wonderful. Introductions definitely help, coming in with the right amount of knowledge. And there's just like completely, by our perception, by people we've talked to in the industry, there's a lot of opportunities for other regions outside of Yame and Uji proper and Wazuka and Uji Tewara. There's lots of other places making great product.
That is true. That is true. And we have seen some really young farmers previously farming other types of tea, like kabusecha or gyokuro, starting to convert or starting trying to learn how to farm tencha in other regions. So there's hope, and there are probably a lot of upcoming opportunities in those places.
Yeah, absolutely. Which would be really great just for the specialty movement in general, because that kind of expands the portfolio of options for consumers. There might be some really interesting terroir expressive places that are producing some fantastic tea. And, not all cultivars are suitable for all environments, too. So, like when you're talking about terroir and environmental factors in any particular geography, what cultivar you have is very important, just similar to wine. There's a lot of grapes like Pinot Noir that are just super ultra sensitive and really can only be grown in certain environments. But very similar for cultivars too. So, some are going to be better expressed in certain regions than in others.
Yeah.
So, yeah, expanding the horizons a bit would be super cool. I mean, there's probably room for 100 new Japanese specialty matcha companies, and each focusing on a different area. Like, there's really a lot of opportunity here. And quite frankly, I think that's where we're gonna head next and focus a lot of our effort in the coming years is trying to find some of these regions that are making great product. Just no one talks about it, or it gets shoved into some gigantic blend. And it's probably going to be good for consumers too, because all of the tea that's coming out of Uji is just going to get more and more and more and more expensive. All of this hand-picked tea, and a lot of the tea here is the price is going nowhere but up for multiple reasons. Not like it's the shortage, it's the economic environment,
It's the demand,
it's the demand
the
for
sheer
being,
demand.
causing things like the shortage. So, just increasing the supply of single origin, single cultivar tea can expand beyond what's currently out there. So, it's going to become more of a luxury product where it's just not very accessible. So even as a consumer now, we should enjoy the prices that we have because I bet in 3 years they double. This is a rough, proximate explanation. And anyone in the Chinese tea world really knows this firsthand with pu'er prices. I started buying tea, pu'er tea in 2013, and I remember thinking that it was kind of expensive at the time. And I recently went back and referenced some of the puer cakes that I own and am aging. And they like 4x in price. And they're not even like that special.
It's if we learn from that, it's time to age some tencha in your freezer.
Yeah, maybe if you have the ability to mill it fresh. So we should really enjoy these prices despite how high they are while they're still at an accessible level. But by expanding the horizons for these different specialty products to other regions, we have the ability to increase supply. Um, of the transparent products where you can learn something. And it's probably a great intersection of value and quality because it's not famous and because the demand will be relatively low. And then the hardest problem that that brand is doing is the consumer education piece, which brands are doing anyway, right? Like most of the matcha companies that are selling product to even B2B, or most of them are selling it to people who don't necessarily know a whole lot about matcha. So a place like Ide Town, which is pretty close to Uji, I think it's an hour or two away, could be someone's Uji, without all the legacy and history. But, from a product perspective, telling the story of the matcha there and the different terroir and micro growing environments, right, there's all sorts of interesting stories to be told to any consumer who's just coming in so fresh. Right? Not everyone needs to be taught uji, uji, uji early on and yame, yame, yame. It's At some point, it's no longer going to be where value lies, which is where the vast majority of people drinking matcha, they care about the price, and it definitely matters. And we would like to see higher quality options that are artisanally produced in the mid range, that can be someone's quote unquote everyday cup of coffee. Product that's Tazumi or Asahi, or from cultivars that are difficult to grow, like Asahi or like Saya Midori. There's just not much of them. They're very special, finite experiences for people to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, we keep talking about this matcha shortage, but as we were even roaming through Uji, there are a lot of these land waiting just to be farmed. There are a lot of these abandoned land. There are a lot of these tea farms that are not necessarily making tencha. There are a lot of potential for Japan to produce much, much more delicious tea in the future, and it's just waiting for us to discover it.
Yeah, on our walk through Shirakawa, walking from Uji, center Uji, like right near the train station, and then branching out. It was really interesting. We saw a lot of abandoned tea plantations. There was a completely abandoned tea plantation 2 blocks away from the Okonuyama Tea Garden, the very famous one from Horiishi Shimeyan. If you go into the Horiishi Shimeyan retail store, I don't know if they have it anymore, but they did the first time I went. There's this little map, and there's this little hike that you can. It's not really a hike. It's like a 10-minute walk up the hill, where you can see one of their gardens. So we popped up there and started our long adventure there. And then 2 blocks over, bam, abandoned tea field. And it's pretty obvious that it's abandoned. There's weeds everywhere. Nothing's kept. All of the shading structures are completely dilapidated.
All falling apart. Things are getting rustic. It's clearly a abandoned tea field.
Arguably from one of the single greatest plots of land to grow matcha in the entire world.
Yeah, it's like you see an abandoned grape vineyard right next to Romani County. It's kind of hard to understand.
So it's also the sad reality here is that there's just not enough, labor. There's not enough people here to continue to support this industry. It's just, a lot of people who really care and work very hard. But, there's still a succession problem here, even though this region's getting all of this recognition, which is a little bit concerning to see. Considering the probably what are astronomical prices they could charge for tea made here if they wanted to, and then to
I
all
would have,
see things.
I would have if I could. It's really just letting gold mines sitting right there using them.
Not everyone's so money motivated.
Okay, I want delicious tea. I want to buy more than one person per can, Ryan.
That's true. That's so
Painful.
real.
Yeah.
That is painful. It's very unfortunate. So that was our adventure here in Uji, picking tea. I think this is a fine place to stop. We're going to continue to record throughout our experiences here in Japan for the 2025 harvest, and do these real time takes or near real time takes. So you get our raw impressions of what it was like. And thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you. Stay tuned.